This race was 12 years in the making for me. I watched the documentary Race Across the Sky in 2010, and it took me until 2022 to finally ride in the Leadville 100 MTB event. Life has a funny way of getting in the way of things you think you want, you know? But 2022 was my year, and I have to say, it was worth the wait, and it was all over in 10 and a half hours, which was about as good as I could hope for my first time at Leadville and my first mountain bike race since July of 2019. And even though I'm an older cyclist now than when I first learned about the race, I'm not sure I would have done any better than I did. From a fitness standpoint, I was obviously a better athlete when I was younger. That's just how it works. But I probably have better bike handling skills now than I did then, which helped on some of the more severe sections of the course. Even if the reflexes aren't what they used to be, race-ending crashes are a reality in this event, and 2022 was no exception. And I definitely had a better grasp of my nutritional needs for the race than probably any other event or sport I have ever competed in. I've learned a tremendous amount about eating during multi-stage or multi-day events in the intervening years since I first started doing ultras. So there's that to consider. And it all paid off during my Leadville birth in that none of those things interfered with me completing the event. Lots of racers have their day ended prematurely due to a nutrition plan not working out on race day or a bad line, leading to a crash that couldn't be recovered from due to injuries or mechanicals. That didn't happen to me, and I'm grateful for it. But I will try my best to address all of the issues that go into successfully completing this event in hopes that you find it interesting and informative. I'm guessing the people who end up watching this video are either debriefing their own races or preparing for an attempt. So I'll give an account of my preparation and the experience in hopes that it helps whoever watches this video. Okay, here we go. The race itself is everything you have heard or seen online. In another video, I called the Leadville 100 MTB the weirdest fucking mountain bike race I've ever done. I stand behind that because, well, it is. The reason for that is because this is a mountain bike race that has a limited amount of single track and only marginally more double track. The traditional trails one would expect to find in most major mountain bike races are in the minority here. Let's see if I can do the course justice with a verbal description. The race started on pavement, stayed on it until it reached a dirt road, and continued until the dirt road turned into what could charitably be called an ATV trail. That trail was a kind of double track hiking trail that went on for a while with a smattering of single track that would come out of nowhere until bam! Right back on the pavement. It doesn't end there though. The pavement goes on until another ATV trail takes racers up to a section of double track that descends a cut line, famously known as the power line descent. And that turns into a gravel road that empties onto a paved road. And that paved road goes on for a long time until the race follows a tractor trail that parallels a fence line that eventually connects to a utility corridor that connects to an ATV style road that empties out into the only true single track in the race. That doesn't last long unless you're behind riders that are terrible at single track like I was, in which case it feels like it goes on forever, but eventually puts you back on a paved road when it finishes. That goes until it turns into a gravel road, then back to a pavement descent that goes across a highway, puts you on a service road next to a lake, connecting you to a trail that takes you across a dam and then out onto a proper hiking trail. Farm roads follow that, and then you ride up a mining road until the mining road turns into something that resembles a trail if you squint while you're looking at it, and that goes all the way up to the top of the world. And then you reverse course and go back almost exactly the same way to get to the finish line. Basically, when you think you have a handle on what's going on in this race as far as hills or terrain or distance, it changes. This is a course that doesn't play favorites with participants or their expectations. Not exactly, at least. Road miles are definitely an advantage going into this race, as is climbing ability, but not to the point that over-specialization in one or the other domain will guarantee a successful race. As a better than average descender, I rarely found my skills in the spotlight, but when I needed them, they made up for my deficits in the other two domains. I'm not a roadie by any means, so road miles don't come easily to me, and my climbing ability is good enough to get me up most obstacles, but I can't put a pace on a climb in the way it's needed to make up time in a race like this. I am the very definition of slow and steady on ascents, and that doesn't win races or beat cutoffs on its own. But it does get me to the downhill sections, and I can honestly say, without a hint of ego, that if we were anywhere near each other during the Leadville 100 MTB on a downhill, I likely passed you. The problem is that you likely passed me immediately after on either a climb or a long stretch of highway that followed. But many of my fellow competitors were super complimentary about my downhill skills. So thanks to everyone who gave me a shout out during the race as they caught and passed me. Nothing motivates you to keep going like a well-timed compliment, especially when you're not feeling your best. And if you're racing right, you really shouldn't be feeling your best. Good racing is about being on the precipice of disaster, and I was often right there while trying to keep my average speed up in sections that didn't play to my strengths. Many of those folks were especially impressed given I was passing full suspension bikes with no rear suspension of my own. So the compliments helped when I heard them. Why wasn't I able to capitalize on the leads created in the descents and maintain them? That was a training failure on my part. I definitely needed more road miles in my training, but I'll get to that shortly. As to not having rear suspension on my bike, no, I went with a rigid frame. I wasn't the only one who chose to ride on a hardtail, but it felt like we were in the minority whenever I took a moment to look around. It's particularly evident when you see highlight videos that are getting uploaded now that we're all done with the race. There wasn't a single moment during the course when I felt like I had made the wrong choice regarding my bike and setup. Like, there are sections where a full suspension mountain bike with a dropper post is possibly worth having for how aggressive it can get with the rocks and ruts. A lot of the worst crashes of the day happened on those sections. That said, the parts that a mountain bike works best on will absolutely benefit from what that type of bike brings to the party.
I don't see how that's a party.
But that kind of bike isn't worth having anywhere else on the course. If anything, it's just overkill for the event. It's a waste of money and tech for what's expected or even needed. And the weight penalty won't help with cutoffs 12 hours into the race. That's for sure. It is very easy to overbike this course by overthinking what to ride. This course is entirely rideable on a hardtail without a dropper post. Was I happy with my bike choice? Absolutely. But if I was to pick the perfect bike setup for this race, it would be a short travel rear suspension 29er without a dropper post. That's the perfect Leadville build in my opinion. Anything more isn't worth the cash or weight penalty. Anything less will require either a higher level of skill or cause more wear and tear on the rider. Like, a long travel full suspension bike with a dropper post is just too much for the vast majority of the Leadville 100 MTB. But no dropper post on a hardtail might be asking a little more than most riders can take over 100 miles from a durability standpoint, if that makes sense.
I hurt myself today.
But a dropper post on a hardtail really won't help that much, so that combo doesn't make a lot of sense. So that leaves a short travel rear suspension with a standard post. But as with all types of bikes and races, your mileage may vary. Anyway, I did this race on a hardtail and have no complaints. But I can also see that it cost me minutes overall when I reflect on the sections that a rear suspension might have helped me carry more speed when the baby head rock garden's forced to slow down. How many minutes? Not many. I just 100% believe that a 29er with a 115mm rear suspension makes this course faster and smoother, even more so than a super compliant hardtail. If I ever get the opportunity to do this race again, that's what I'm pulling out of my bike quiver. Bikes like that aren't cheap, but they're worth the investment.
I wouldn't sell my bike for all the money in the world. Not for $100 billion, million, trillion dollars.
Leadville is a once-in-a-lifetime race for many folks, so getting the right bike for the event is one of the smarter decisions one can make before the gun even goes off.
3, 2, 1.
Another reason for doing your due diligence regarding bicycle selection on this course is because the Leadville 100 MTB isn't just about how fast you can go. It's about slowing down the least. More than a few social media posts I saw in the aftermath from people who missed cutoffs or didn't set a personal best weren't speed problems so much as they were braking problems. Too much lost speed and trying to get it back after the fact. Scary sections have that effect on a person who either isn't riding the right bike or isn't able to maximize the bike they are riding. That applies to all of those times a person has to stop for fueling and refueling too. Choosing light and fast with the bike will allow you to carry food and water without too much weight penalty and make it possible to slow down or stop less often. Because as good as the aid stations are at Leadville, nothing will drop your average speed like stopping. 0 kilometers an hour is not getting you any closer to the finish line.
I meant to do that.
And cutoffs are always looming. Seriously, the cutoffs in this event are merciless. Not just from an overall perspective either. There's an outbound cutoff and more than a few inbound cutoffs too. Most riders do not have the buffer necessary to make repeated aid station stops. Even rolling stops can hurt a rider, so the longer one can self-support on the bike and in motion, the better. That said, I should mention that the aid stations at this event are next level. I was competing self-supported, yes, but toward the end of the race, I started to rely on the neutral aid stations for fluids and calories. And that was by design on my part because of everything I had read during my race research, and it worked perfectly. I handled all of my nutritional needs until just after the halfway mark of the race, which happens to be after the big Columbine descent. At that point, I was spent on fluids and needed 2 stops to refill my water bottles on my way to the finish line. And say what you will about this course or the cutoffs or anything else you want, but the aid stations are amazing. I've never seen better organized and coordinated aid stations at any race or event in my life, and I doubt I ever will. Leadville does aid stations better than typical races, and on a scale that seems more like you're riding through a festival each time you pass through one of them, either outbound or inbound. I'm not even joking or exaggerating here. The aid stations at Leadville are basically block parties. They do it perfectly, and in no small part to the volunteers that populate the aid stations. This is a rare event that you can actually write the aid stations into your race plan because they're that reliable. You can set your watch to them and with some forethought and planning consider them part of your support crew. Just be nice to them whether you use them or not. Wave, smile, say thanks, especially outbound when you're full of vim and vigor, because you just never know what's going to happen inbound. So put a little karma in the karma bank, whether you need to make a withdrawal or not. Piss and vinegar burn off quickly, and you might find yourself relying on the kindness of strangers you ignored on your way out while trying to make your way back in. Those volunteers deserve every bit of credit they get and then some. I can't say enough good things about them, and they probably deserve an entirely separate video now that I think about it.